I am Dr. Sheena C. Howard. I'm here at the Locust Moon Comics Festival, selling my book, Black Comics, Politics of Race and Representation, which won an Eisner Award in 2014 at the San Diego Comic Convention. And momentarily I'll be going into a panel on comics and hip hop, talking about hip hop's influence on, specifically for me, the Boondocks comic strip and comics influences on hip hop. Also the commodification of Black culture and Black vernacular in these forms of media.
For as long as I can remember, I've been infatuated and drawn to these two cultures of comic books and hip hop, and all of the different forms that they encompass. They're American innovations. They're two forms with long and convoluted histories and actually prehistories. The history of comic books starts before comic books with comic strips and big little books and pulps. The history of hip-hop begins with soul and with jazz and with disco and graffiti and poetry and dance crazes and all things rhythmic and funky. And they both incorporate all manner of different things into the larger culture. Comics culture encompasses comic strips and animation and video games and so many other forms. Hip hop is obviously more than rap music. It's graffiti and dance and DJing and rhyming and all of these other elements. Both forms combine elements, be it words and pictures or beats and rhymes, or DJing and breakdancing and spray painting and practically everything thrown into one giant party. They're hybrid cultures, they're cultures of inclusion. And so today I've been lucky to assemble a group of creators who come from all angles and mix these elements in their own ways in their own work, coming from different directions and meeting right here at Locust Moon. And I'll just offer a couple of super quick introductions and let you sort of fill in the greater picture. Dr. Sheena C. Howard, who's the author of Black Comics, Politics of Race and Representation. Ronald Wimberly, who is, at the very least, the illustrator for the Locust Moon Festival poster this year, and has written and illustrated a number of works. He's illustrated most recently She-Hulk, did Prince of Cats, the graphic novel from DC Vertigo, Life Sentences, the story of Graham from DC Vertigo. Done a bunch of other work for various people, has a beautiful, beautiful piece in Locust Moon's giant Little Nemo Dream Another Dream volume. Ronald Wimberly.
I hadn't seen you before.
And Eric Orr, the man who in the early 80s was artist, did a number of subway installations with Keith Haring, and then Keith Haring and Pop Shop purchased an ad on the back of what was the first ever hip-hop comic, Rappin' Max Robot, which Eric published in 1986.
Yes.
So this is, right here, for all intents and purposes, the jump off, the ground zero of this entire topic and conversation. So, Eric, you've addressed this in some of your work. I mean, obviously, as I said, hip-hop culture is, at this point, it's world culture. It's going to seep into anything that any of us do in some way. But you've addressed it specifically in some of your...
Yeah, I think for me, my whole interest in comics was really started with the Boondocks comic strip. And so if anybody familiar with the Boondocks, probably the television show you might be more familiar with, but with the comic strip, it's all hip-hop culture, from the clothes that they wear, baggy jeans, t-shirts, the African-American vernacular English that was used in the comic strip was fascinating to me because this comic strip was like a cultural icon. It blew up for a comic strip by a black artist about black Americans and a family to blow up the way it did, to me was amazing. And so I think what I found in my dissertation was on the Boondocks comic strip, that the strip, from the language to the aesthetic, it validated black culture and black cultural features that have been dismissed in everyday life. So if hip hop shows up to an interview for a job, hip hop is not going to get that job. But this comic strip validated all those features, and I think hip hop does the same thing. That's my perspective, how I see the two.
Yeah, I find the Boondocks, like personally, the Boondocks I was reading, and it was the first representation of a culture outside of, white suburban America comic strips that I had seen, with the possible exception of Wee Pals going way back, Rory Turner.
Yep.
And it was definitely it was a revelation in the comics pages. When the cartoon came around much later, that was a whole other thing because the music was provided by Asheru from the Unspoken Herd, and I grew up in Central Virginia, in Charlottesville, where the Unspoken Herd were the local act. They were the guys like Blue Black, the other MC in the Unspoken Herd, was my first boss at a coffee shop.
Wow.
And taught me much of what I knew about music and the culture. Rob Jackson, he was on our panel in DC that we did at AwesomeCon. And he was the person who, when I was a teenager working my first job in a coffee shop, my distinct memories were not just like his visual style, like designing the art for his records and things. He was also playing music that was so far outside of my realm of comprehension, whether it was like DJ Crush imports or he had an advanced copy of Busta Rhymes The Coming, and I have this really crystal clear memory of like working this tiny little coffee shop in a college town and hearing this record that just sounded like nothing else I'd ever heard in that moment. And years later, I'm doing this and getting to work with the Unspoken Herd guys discussing these cultures that they have become a huge part of. And Asher is a community activist in DC and around the world. He's done a whole lot of stuff, and it's amazing that the Boondocks gave him a much larger platform to, a cartoon became this platform to disseminate hip hop in a much larger way to a bunch of people who would not have otherwise experienced it. That's a bit of a tangent, sorry.
I mean, for me, the transition from the comic strip to the television show, some of the structural constraints were evident. I mean, we see a kid's personal experience in the comic strip, a comic strip that he started when he was at the University of Maryland, that he had complete control over. We see the transition and the commodification of black culture from the comic strip to the television show, the commercialization, the hip-hop materialization. So in the animated television show, you have them using the N-word incessantly, which they never used in the comic strip. You have homophobia, you have more sexism, even more sexism than was in the comic strip. You have misogyny, and so even in hip-hop, we can see the transition from people's personal experience being very socially and politically conscious to the point in time when the African American experience was commodified, packaged, repackaged, and then sold back to us. So in both form and content, whether it's a comic or a animated television show or hip hop, we see that transition, which becomes very problematic when we talk about the representations of African Americans.
Do you think that commodification started with the animated show?
I think that transition, I know that newspaper, obviously the comic strip is being sold, but when it comes to animated television, there are so many different forces that were involved that changed the content of his work. So he didn't have complete control.
So he lost control.
He lost control.
I don't know.
He lost control, but he also, as you say, there was also enhanced freedom in terms of what he could include in terms of content that wasn't available in a 3-panel daily strip that has to get past all of the syndicate censors. But it definitely, the showrunner and Magruder were gone by the final season.
Exactly. So you can't deny the cultural gatekeeping and all the different forces that are influencing what he's eventually putting out on the animated television show. And you can look at the distinct differences between the strip and the show and see that, the wit and the social and political consciousness of the strip was not in the animated television.
I got a little bit of inside ball on that. Let's hear it. I got a little bit of inside ball on that, but like, I'll just say that, there's a lot of, even before he got off the strip, it was kind of like, it wasn't just his work, like he was working with Carl Jones and like, they were working on the animated show together, and, really, you're not going to tell Aaron Magruder what you're going to put into his animated show. Like, he's a powerful personality, and Carl is very strong too, so, I mean, I worked on a show that was big.
Right?
Yeah, well, that's an epic story.
Yeah.
Like, it's an epic Hollywood story. But like, I was kind of a part of the collateral of that sort of meltdown, because like I worked on Black Dynamite, which is all about the commodification of Black culture. It's its own sort of mixed bag. But that's like hip hop and funk combined. Yeah, that's it.
So with just in regard, you've done a lot of. I mean, obviously you wrote the book on Black comics, quite literally. But what was your first? What would be the first thing that you? What was your first exposure to like seeing any of this culture reflected in comics? I mean, obviously, I was reading as a kid and I was seeing like, making fun of breakdancers and Archie books and things, but but you get that. I mean, for me, I have the perspective of like looking at that period where over the course of 7 or 8 years, it goes from like the 2 breakdancing white kids in Archie to Kid and Play getting their own comic from Marvel. You get that incredibly steep rate of hip-hop culture suddenly becoming world culture, whether it's, DST scratching Rocket with Herbie Hancock, or, in comics, seeing the lettering styles change and things. But what would be the point where what was your first, I guess, exposure to that through this medium?
Yeah. I mean, for me as a kid, I didn't read comics. I don't think I was ever introduced to comics by anybody in my family, or anybody that I was around, or anybody that I went to school with. I mean, so I really didn't start reading any form of comics until, like I said, the Boondocks comic strip, and that, for whatever reason, that resonated with me. I thought that it was timely, it was relevant, it actually taught me some things about my history, like things that I may have known, but from the perspective of the comic strip, things that I may have looked deeper into. So for example, Huey and Riley in the comic strip went to a school called Edgar Hoover. And so when I'm reading the strip, I know it's funny and I'm laughing, but I don't really understand the complete context. So I went back and looked up, COINTELPRO, Edgar Hoover, and all those things. I'm like, wow, that's why Huey didn't want to go to that school. So it taught me some things about that. Obviously, I already knew about, Huey Newton, but just the fact that Huey's name was Huey, I went and I bought a book about Huey Newton, and so it taught me all those things. And I think, like Patrick was saying earlier, I think when forms of media have multiple meanings, so they mean different things to different people, and they can be interpreted in different ways by different people. It's not just one single meaning. I think those are the types of forms of media that do well, that people buy, because if all of us in this room are reading a comic strip, we all might laugh at it, but we might be laughing at different things because of who we are, race, gender, social class. And so that was interesting to me, and that's when I first got started with comics. And so as I did my research, I was looking for a book that talked about the history of African American artists. I was going to go to the library, pick a book, write my literature review, and there was none. I mean, not even on a superficial level, just mentioning the really, really popular African American artists. I actually remember checking out a book that was called, The American History of Comics, and I remember it mentioning one African American cartoonist in that entire book. And then when you talk about comic strips, was what I focus on. It's even more, white male.
I mean, it's a crazy cat though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, no one,
Yeah.
like, it's never mentioned that Harriman was
Yep.
African.
I
It's
talk
like,
about that in the book.
yeah, it's like, that was, you want to talk about whitewashing things that far back.
Passing and
It's
Yeah.
funny you mentioned like comics, and one of the things that influences me is like the Black arts movement. Like if you're talking about Huey, right? Although it was Emory Douglas, and like actually some great women working in that magazine too. But like Black Panthers had some. Maybe it's not comics in the strictest sense, but like actually I would consider it comics, like what Emory Douglas did.
yeah, I mean in comics, art is symbolism. When we talk about the suffrage movement, Black Panthers, Black Power, symbolism led a lot of that movement, Black Power fists and things like that. People drawing those symbols to represent something. Any movement has a symbol that people can recognize and relate to and build off of. So yeah, I can see the relationship between art, aesthetic, and civil movement.
Well, the next time you go to do some research, you'll be able to find in this genre, hip hop and comics. This book will be in Cornell University's library,
Okay.
rare books in manuscripts.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
next time you and I say that because I did the book. I love what I do. I didn't do it because I wanted to make a lot of money. I just did it because it wasn't nothing out there that spoke to us. And let's jump 26 years later. They found this book and says, Eric, you started something.
Yeah.
And because of that, historically, it
Right.
makes sense, So
Right.
it's not always you make a whole lot of money and now you're
Right.
famous or it's important. It's important because I love what I did. I did it because I wanted to do it. I did it DIY. And now, hopefully it inspires other people to do the same
Yeah, man,
thing.
like not to be invisible. Like to
Yeah.
have someone recognize that is,
Yeah.
like you were saying,
Recognition.
it's not, you couldn't find that book, but
Right.
it's not like the artists weren't there. You know
Right,
what
so
I'm saying?
there. There's
Right.
a lot more that I wish I could have talked about that I didn't. A lot more of these books need to be written.
I'm sure there is. Now there is. When did you
This book is 2013.
Oh,
It's
well,
recent.
well-
I finished my district. I started working on it in 2009. So we have independent African American artists. John Jenney has a book. There's a few, but not as many as we need.
The funny thing is that the conversation kept on wanting to go in these other directions. Whether it was Chuck D talking about how, he was using his graphic design background to design the Public Enemy logo and how he was a graphic design major and how he did these things. Whether it was Juice talking about, his story about I'm a Latin kid growing up in the hip hop community, and except for Sons of the Tiger and Marvel comics, like all of a sudden there's Sons of the Tiger, all of a sudden there's White Tiger or whatever. He's like all of a sudden they're like there's someone in Spanish Harlem in a Marvel comic, and that representation was huge. All of a sudden they were seeing themselves reflected in a way that they had not. That whole conversation just kept growing, and the more I talked to people, the more I was. I started sitting down and writing some articles about like, okay, let's talk about hip hop and comics because these are the things that I love. And there was nothing. I had to put together these panels and write about these things because I was like, I like this. What else is there? And if I search in one place, like I get the Onyx comic from Marvel, which is an experience. And, Onyx needs to go to another alien planet and have a rap battle and then beat up a bunch of people. It's not a particularly great comic.
That's when you talk about holes in literature. Yesterday I went to a conference in which James Peterson was speaking. James Peterson calls himself a hip hop scholar. He just published a book called Hip Hop and African American Culture. John Jennings did the cover for that book. He did the cover for my book, and I had a conversation with him, and one of the things that he told me was, when he told people in academia that he wanted to be a hip hop scholar, they laughed at him. You know, you can't do that. You can't study hip hop in an academic way. And when I did my dissertation on comics, nobody really took it seriously. I mean, it wasn't something that, you know, advisors and academics were like, oh, this is going to do something.
They didn't think that the whole genre was going to
Yeah.
survive, you know?
Yeah.
Although I will say that, you know, that Das FX's idea of here's the rap scholar here to make a dollar might not actually be the best commercial plan
Right.
in the world.
Right.
I mean, but isn't that academia anyway? Like,
Well,
it's
yeah. And in fact, eventually, when I started looking for these things, it took me quite a while to track down Eric because, you know, the only way I found out about Rap and Max Robot was by setting up searches on eBay for rap comic. There were no resources for tracing the combinations of these things.
Right.
Occasionally, I would find a bit about, like, you know, De La Soul is Dead had a comic strip insert. 3 Feet High utilized comic book imagery. I would, you know, and from talking to Chuck D and people, Bill Sienkiewicz did an EPMD cover, all of that stuff. But that was to me there was this huge void, and so I was able to thankfully track down Eric and get the story from the beginning, and that really opened it up.
Again, that's hip hop.
Finding you was huge because all of a sudden the conversation made sense in a way that it had not been before. Because I looked at Prince of Cats and went, oh, this. Here's a question. Schoolie D, obviously a superheroic identity of sorts.
Yes.
How did you settle on that sort of alter ego?
The alter ego is when I was in a family of 9, I was like the smallest. I was really tiny. I thought I was going to be a midget. I swear to you. But so it was like I had to. And if anybody, an artist, know when you're a little weird when you're younger. Like I did all the other stuff like phone water balloons, zip police, you know, stealing cars. So I did all that, but it was that part of me that just felt different. And early on, everybody noticed. Like I remember my first band outside of my family, and it was like all of us, and we were like 9, and we were like practicing. They didn't want to rehearse. So I'm like, don't you guys want to be big stars when we grow up? And I fired everybody, and it was like, good luck, motherfucker. You know we're 9. We want to go play football. Good luck playing all the instruments by yourself. So it was, I think it was like that intensity was like always there. Did I answer the question?
Yeah,
okay.
you got it. But Schoolie D, the name itself.
Oh, Schoolie D, the name itself. So the characters, I was gonna say, is like my brother, my friends, like all the characters. I just like every part of it. Like I take, especially for my sisters. I had 5 sisters who like really influenced me. They let me do whatever the fuck I wanted to do. So it's like I took all this influence from my neighborhood, from my friends. So it was kind of like easy that it wasn't just all me. So it was easier for me to become Schoolie D because it's like there's a representation of my family, my friends, my neighborhood, and my town. So it was like easy to come up with the whole thing. Did I answer?
Yes. Eric, here's a question that I somehow not about to ask you in all of these panels we've done.
In 4 years.
Yeah, in 3 years. So you were working in a world of graphic design and hip hop and graffiti. Why did you not establish that sort of identity? Because
That is that Max Robot is my identity.
you
I can see this.
rather than you settled on an icon instead of a name.
Well, no, it started just as the head, you know, because the early days of graffiti, everybody had their Norman plumes and their graphics and stuff like that, and I didn't want to go that direction. So when I saw Herring's first Radiant Baby, that kind of stuck with me. And I was going to SVA at the time, and I had a teacher by the name of, he was head of Scholastic Magazine, and he was the graphic head.
Okay. Yeah.
And he told me that if you want to speak to people, you're going to have to keep it very simple, you know, when you speak to the masses. And that's what graffiti was. You wanted to speak at, let me back up. In the beginning, it was for us, the circle. But then, when you put it out in the public, it becomes for the masses. So when you want to speak to the masses, you've got to keep it simple. So I didn't want to do the letters because when it came into the station, it was a big blurb, it was beautiful, it was abstract, but you never knew who it was. And I wanted people to know who I was. So I created that robot head. It got the attention of Keith Haring. From that, the Robot Head, while I was working with Strong City Records, in my downtime, I developed a character. The character was me because everybody that came through it had a personality. You know, Busy Bee, Max from Master of Ceremony, Fat Joe, who was a graffiti artist as well. He went by Joey Crack. So everybody.
Graffiti.
So Max became Eric, and yeah. So that's how that thing started.
Can I cut off? It's like it's.
I have a question.
I was about to say, it's like so many women in the audience. We
Please.
have a nice young lady. So come on.
Well, that was actually
Yeah,
the
get right.
subject of my question. I'm wondering, were there any women coming up doing hip hop comics?
I didn't.
Was there any? Well, I mean, initially, was there anyone else doing hip hop comics?
Not when I was doing mine. No.
Yeah. I mean,
It was real. You know, the whole graffiti and hip hop is really nasty.
and
Especially
comics
the early
also. I
days.
mean, we're dealing with a
I'm
cross
gonna beg
section
to
here.
differ.
That's,
Yep.
I want to beg to differ.
We're
because
talking about
like, from the early
early
80s.
80s.
I'm going to say it's like from the early 80s. I used to also do. There were a lot of babies in the hood. I would do the caps, the baseball caps, and the mothers saw what I was doing on the walls. And all the mothers like, can you do like Rashawn or Boo Boo? And it's
Right.
like so on Saturday mornings from like 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. I sat on my porch and the women, and it was like, don't change it.
They would
like
support.
They would support. So,
That's different than
I know.
jumping in and doing it. I know one graffiti girl, Charmaine, you know, but she was tough. You know, she was tough. She could hang with anybody, but you know, most women they wanted to, you know,
we still
because it was dirty in the summer.
Man,
It was very dirty in the summer. It was very dirty when you wait. I didn't say shit.
I know. The question is, you know what I'm saying? We look at us, we're assholes, we're assholes. The question was for her, and told Maddie, like, yeah, so I'll answer that question for you. Of course I was, of course we're women to shut up.
But I don't know specifically about hip hop comics. My guess would be that as far as creators, women were not represented in this medium, and that's true then, that's true now. And it's just like hip hop, there's usually only room for one female artist to be accepted or popular. And if there are more than one, then they have to be battling each other in some way. And that's not the case for men. And like I said, Barbara Brandon is the only black female comic strip artist to ever be nationally syndicated. There's Jackie Orms, but she was particularly in black newspapers. Barbara Brandon is the only one to be nationally syndicated. And I had a conversation with her, and she said it always made her feel bad when people would congratulate her and say, you know, you're the first black, because she knew as long as she was doing her strip, where I'm coming from, that no other black female experience would be represented. And there hasn't been one after her as far as comic strips are concerned. So, I mean, I don't know specifically about hip hop, but I could guess that there probably weren't any female hip hop artists that were recognized in that way.
I have a question for you, right? In your studies, and you're piecing together a sort of a history, and you're seeing how these structures are built, and you know, economically, you know, what needs to happen. So if we look at the space that was made for maybe black men representing themselves in hip hop, could something like that? What would you posit would need to happen for that to happen for women, or that perspective, like in comics or in hip hop? Like, is it, you know, like, because we have a space, or we had a space, I would say now, like a large portion of the space is sort of like the identity as a commodity and sold outside of it, you know, but you know,
like I was saying earlier. Yeah,
what needs to happen though? You know, like, what would need to happen?
that's a good question.
What would you want to have?
Yeah,
that's
That's easier.
I mean, I would like more females, period, to be employed by mainstream publishers, by publishers that are not even mainstream, because I know they're out there. I'm in a lot of groups that are particularly, you know, aimed at women. I mean, I would like to see more women be employed for whatever reason. I mean, I know the artists are out there because I know them, and if few of them, make it through the pipeline every now and then, but not as many as we would like to see. I think it's just like anything else, things are male dominated, and I think that women get socialized at a certain point in their youth to steer towards other areas. I have a master's in graphic design. I was only ever the black female person in the classroom. Never even any women of color with a master's in graphic design. And I do remember when I was doing my master's, it was 21, 22, I did start sketching some characters that were female of color. But I think too what happens is you don't get the support and the encouragement that a male would get. Even in my graphic design classes, there are microaggressions, little things that happen to women that persuade them or dissuade them from going in this particular area. And I think that happened to me a little bit as well. And that time I didn't have a support system. Now because of this book, I know more people. I know more people. I know supportive males. I'm in supportive female groups. But as a young kid, as a graphic design major, I didn't have that support system. I wasn't connected in that way.
They should do it more DIY.
Well,
Well, now you can.
that's what I'm saying. As
do
hip hop is the true hip hop is anti-establishment. So, why it's like for me when I hear young people say, "Well, I need to get a deal, I need to get Pepsi, I need to get," I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Well, you have like
It's like true hip hop is
space.
anti-Pepsi Cola, anti-Madison Avenue, you're a best like us, anti-Mr. Whitey. You know what I'm saying? It's like you like hip hop, we like hip hop. Everybody on the outside is Mr. Whitey. We're all this. You understand what I'm saying? It's like It's like what is it that you think that women are kind of like? It's like, are you expected to be
too aggressive?
To be
too machismo?
Noticed by Pepsi Cola, or should you rethink? What do you think you guys rethink about the anti-establishment thing?
Today we have a lot more spaces for people to just publish things. You publish a comic on Amazon and take you a couple. I mean, there are a lot more. There's web comics. There are all these things. There are women in those areas doing those things. But I think that everybody wants to get to a level of recognition that's going to reach a mass audience. I mean, you're creating these things for people to read and accept. So, you might be anti-establishment or anti-whatever, but if a mainstream publisher comes and wants to publish your work, most people are going to say yes. They want that recognition.
I mean, and it happened in hip hop too. I want to say like aggression has no gender, but one gender tends to have more aggression.
Because women can't be aggressive. Women can't be aggressive. If you think about Hillary Clinton running for president, either she cried, she was a woman, we don't want a female president because she cried, or if she was too aggressive or too much of an authority figure, she's acting like a man or she's a bitch. And these are actual headlines that you can go up and look. So women are not allowed that freedom of identity. I mean, men are boxed into with what they can and can't be, but it's even worse for women in a male-dominated society.
I'm just box this all in together then.
Oh,
I'm gonna say, like when I first got started on the record label, these mobsters in Jersey, they pulled me aside, and they were just like, "Well, this is what you do. It's like you gotta hire women. Women should be the majority of your staff." And 35 years later, it still holds true. And it was for a simple reason. You know what the reason is? Women have responsibilities. They will show the fuck up. They will, and they're opinionated.
So they understand responsibility.
They understand responsibility. And as I was saying earlier, it's like I have a Revlon audience. If anybody knows what that means, 6 to 8% of my fan base is women. I researched it, I'm like, holy shit, and I started asking her, because you know what, women tend to know I'm like women, it's like I'm so school D, fuck that bullshit, but women tend to know I'm goofing.
Yeah.
And that softens up the whole thing, where opposed to like when I work with men, it was kind of just like, they wanted to be me, when women just wanted to support me.
But I think what's important to understand too, 6-8% fan-based women, but it's important to understand that just because people are consuming this medium doesn't mean they like the representation. They could be consuming them because there are no other options out there, or they could be consuming it because they like certain aspects of it, but it doesn't mean they like the gender representation of it.
They don't really like you.
I'm a media scholar, so I do a lot of focus groups on, why are you consuming this particular media? Why do you like this? And I mean, that's just the truth.
Those are
of the
two
matter.
different questions.
Yeah. Is anybody, come on, just.
Yeah, and we probably have time for one or two.
This guy
We might have
for
time
15
for one or
minutes.
two questions. Yes.
Alright, so I guess more like 90s style hip hop has a lot of influence from Eastern martial arts
Right.
and especially with Wu-Tang, but other also in the movies and stuff and this coming out in album covers. It's anyone who wants to talk about how comics, art, hip hop, and Eastern martial arts all come together for that 90s New York style.
I would say that it goes straight back to the 70s where the people who were making the music, who were creating hip hop, the Kung Fu movies are hot. I mean, as I said, talking to Johnny Juice and Chuck D and people, they're like, Master of Kung Fu, Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. Those were the magazines.
5 Fingers of Death.
5 Fingers of Death. Those things were part of the culture from the beginning, and I don't know if they surfaced until the 90s, but they were always there as part
I
of it.
think what we did, because we came from that, directly from that era, we took the theme of what Bruce Lee he was teaching discipline, he was teaching be yourself, he was teaching, it was all the big balls, it was always against establishment, and it was always against fighting for the right of the poor. And that's how hip hop was given to us by the angels. It's just look, y'all motherfuckers need sound because it's gonna be cracking in about 3 years. And they gave it to us, and we had a whole industry to ourselves. And we, so the whole, Thunder God, the flying killer team, that was so we took the philosophy and internalized it. And I think in the 90s, they just spit it back out. You know what I'm saying? So quietly we did what Bruce Lee did, the master did. We did it quietly in drones, but in the 90s it just kind of regurgitated and came out and said, well, this is, because DVDs came out.
In comics, the Boondocks is Toriyama. It's kind of like a bootleg version of his work. You know what I mean? So in comics, it's been there. I mean, I don't know about hip
Speed
hop.
Racer.
I mean, my work
is
is heavily influenced
Kimba.
by manga. So
We are going to have to wrap it up because they have another panel coming in here. Let me just quickly tell us again who you are, Twitter or URL, and how to get your stuff, what you're working on.
My Twitter is @Dr. Sheena Howard. Please do follow me. Thank you for mentioning that. This is my book, Black Comics, Politics of Race and Representation. It won an Eisner Award in July at the San Diego Comic Convention. I am the first woman of color to ever win an Eisner, which says a lot about the industry itself since 2014. It's about the representations of specifically African it's about the contributions of specifically African American cartoonists, and it traces the history of those contributions, and it also talks about cultural gatekeeping in the comics industry, so the different layers that people go through when publishing their work and what it looks like at the end after it goes through editor, publisher, and all of those stages.
Thank you. Scooby.
I'm going to start from now to the back. I'm into Cartoon Network when I showed Aqua Teen Hunger Force. It's been 14 years. This is the last season. 14 seasons. I'm working on the last season now. And I remember when I got involved because I was they also had a show on there, a Rudy and Go-Go show. I was a character, and I was a Space Ghost. I was his first Space Ghost Coast to Coast. So I was always involved in that. And I remember when they asked me if I wanted how much I wanted to get paid. I was like, I want to write a Scooby-Doo song. That's how I want to get paid. So they sent me the script for Aqua Teen, and so this is where I know I got ripped. It was I started drawing shit. You should do this, you should do that, send it back, and go back and forth. So I help with the drawing, I do all the music and everything. Then I'm going to say, when we jump all the way back to '82, this I created, helpfully created first. This album covers the 1985 first gangster rap And I enjoy my life. Also feel composed, and my paintings and sculptures can be found on my website, schoolyD.com, on L, Jesse Schooly D Weaver on Facebook. I usually have somebody do this for me because this is like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, not that I'm prima donna or some shit like that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Where's my people? Not like I'm like that. It's just like because like, my artist brain is kind of like, because it's all over the place. And if I start saying everything I did, it'll take like,
next time I'll take the notes and do this.
It'll be like, oh wait, he's so full of himself. And I'm also going to say, it's like, you know, King of New York.
Yeah.
They did come to Philly.
There we go. Ronald Wimberly. You have a table at Locust Moon, as do you, actually.
Niggas, look, see, so check out my art. And just nobody want to buy something. It's kind of expensive, but not. It's like the firstborn. But you can just look at it and just schoolyD.com. Anyway, go. I'm sorry. I just took over this spot.
Oh, it's cool, man. I did DMC. He's got his comic out right now. So I'm the creative consultant, which means I wrote it, but then they changed things. I got 5 pages in Wolverine and the X-Men number 10, which I think was last week. Issues 5 and 6 of She-Hulk. I got some books in the...
You did Criterion?
Yeah, I did Criterion Zatoichi, like the box set. I also did Fran Judex for Criterion.
Nice.
Yeah.
And where do your Rainer Foe?
Yeah, Rainer Foe is my thing on Twitter. You can find me on that. Or you just Google Ronald Wimberly, it'll pop up. You know, and yeah, keep an eye out, like me and Saul Williams are working on something for next year. That's gonna be really cool.
Well, for me, the great thing was that the book is now in the collection of Cornell University's rare books and manuscripts, and it's going to be preserved forever. Forever. And I'm going to do a reprint of this particular book, and I'm adding some pages with some graffiti friends of mine. Again, I have this, some music here with a reprint of the zine that came out right after the book. And you can find me at Orr Designs on Instagram, Eric Orr Fine Art on Facebook, and if you Google, I normally pop up.
All right, and I'm Patrick Reed from Depth of Field Magazine, Depth Scene on Twitter, depthofieldmagazine.com. Thank you all so much for coming.